Welcome to Turning Pages, a series of in-depth conversations with authors about their works. Joining me on Turning Pages, Daniel Fuller, his new collection, Making Sense of Nonsense, and he's here to talk about it. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Mike. How are you doing?
I'm good. So is the compendium of all of the individual nonsense making sense of nonsense, or is it the portion at the back where you kind of walk through the process, or how do you conceive of this whole thing?
Yeah, that's a great question to start off with. Can I just clarify the title? It's Making Sense from Nonsense, just
From
in case
nonsense.
you're looking
My
for it. Yeah.
apologies. Yes.
No, that's okay. I think you can look at that title and look at this idea as in a whole bunch of different ways, and I think that's part of the fun of the project. So part of the poems and each individual section of the poems looks at different aspects of sort of, life or magic or absurdity or violence or whatever. And that's kind of me trying to make sense out of some nonsense. But then the whole aspect to what's in the appendix at the back, where I detail the process that I made, that I used to make the poems, I had to make sense from a lot of different nonsense, just in a more literal way from Google and from AI technology.
Did you, when you were doing the poems, because obviously you talk about writing, you setting yourself this goal of 100 poems.
Yeah.
Did you envision having that section at the back, or was it just going to be the poems?
Yeah, at first it was just the poems. So I completed the project in 2023, like around May. And I just had what I thought represented the best quality of the poems, 84 poems in total in 4 different sections. And I wanted to just release it like that. And I did sort of do a limited release of it here where I live in China, just to friends and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted just to see it stand on its own. And give it some time and see reactions and things. But the more the project started to expand, and we can talk about that later if you want, I started to see that part of the fun of enjoying the poems, I think, because the poems can stand by themselves, but when you don't know the process behind how they were made, I think a little bit of the fun and interest in the project gets taken away. So I decided to add that part.
So I do want to talk about later in the process later. But we want to back the train up to kind of the beginning of this and how this sprung from a Google image search of a dragon boat race.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm a teacher and I was doing a grade 6 class near the end of the year in 2022, I guess that would be. No, 2021, sorry, like June. And they do something called the Dragon Boat Festival here in China. And they were doing a project where they had to make these dragon boats out of cardboard. And we were going to do sort of like a Flintstone style foot race around the track. And so a kid just asked to look at a dragon boat head so that she could sort of emulate it. And so when I put it up there, it was one of those days where you get a little bit of inspiration out of nowhere. And as the kids were kind of working, I was looking at underneath the Google image search where I'd type dragon boat head. There are all those sort of suggested search words, or people who searched for this also searched for that. And it's a collection of words. And it just happened as sort of the words that came up in order in my sort of tired brain made a kind of a abstract poem. And I sort of felt like, I wonder if there's anything there. I wonder if I can use those words to make poetry.
Had you been part of the Shenzhen writing group before this?
Yeah, when I moved here in 2020, I made it a goal to get back into creative writing. I think the pandemic, I'm probably not the only one who started looking at their lives in a different way because of the pandemic. And I remember how much I used to love writing and do a lot of creative writing. And I really had stopped for more than a decade, probably 15 years even before I'd done any writing. So when I moved here, I thought fresh start. I'm going to look up a writing group. There was one that was just starting up by another couple of people that had just moved here. And so it was like a perfect opportunity. And I started trying to do some writing, a novel and a couple of other poems. But man, this project has basically taken over my life since it started.
Now, when you'd written previously, had you given yourself parameters or strictures the way you do with this project, or is that specific to this project?
Yeah, I think it was more specific to this project because I wanted to see if it would work. And I know it's sort of nonsensical in a way, which I guess fits the whole project to be nonsensical. But that number 100 has like a sort of a feeling to it, right? Like if you reach that number, you feel like you've accomplished something. So I set that as a goal. And then as I detail in the book, in the appendix, when I first started out trying to make these poems and just using the words in the Google under the search bar, they were pretty bad. They were fun in a way. They were really weirdly abstract, but I didn't think they had much mass appeal. And so I started to look at it more like a game almost, and to see if I could make poems out of this. And so as I kind of tried out more and more different poems, I started to develop some rules for myself that I had to follow. And it turned into a list of, I think, like 11 rules in total. And so by the time I got to poem sort of number 50, I had the full set of rules in mind. And that's when the project really just started to take off. Once I had gotten used to doing it and knew what the rules were that I set for myself, then it just became like flowing like water. You know, became a really fun project.
Yeah, I think in the section you say it was like poem 48, you kind of realized what the rules were, and poem 53, you finally kind of felt like you got it.
Yeah, you're right.
And
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
curious about kind of like sussing out rules as you're developing them,
yeah,
and what kind of like thought process that is for you. Like, are you is it like experimentation till you land upon a set of rules, or like do you ever feel like you're kind of going into like a cul-de-sac at all, rather than,
yeah,
like driving down a street?
yeah, right. I think part of it for me comes from because I'm a language teacher and I've been a teacher for 20 years now. And part of like not only being like a language and literature teacher where I'm familiar with poetry and I'm familiar with writing style and stuff, but also just a teacher of the language on a fundamental level as like as a second language or an additional language. So I'm really familiar with grammar and, word choice and things like that. And so to me, like, it kind of just came naturally. I looked at the poems and I was like, I know what the problem is here. One of the first problems I noticed was that there were only content words. There were only nouns and noun phrases and maybe verbs. And you can't really make something that sounds good just using those kinds of words. You got to have little words like at and in and of and because and stuff like that. So I think it came sort of pretty naturally from that. I would introduce a rule and then I would try out a couple of poems and then I would see like, okay, here's a phrase that popped into my mind that I want to use, but the rules aren't letting me do that. So I guess I need a new rule. So that's pretty much how they developed. And then by the time I had them all, I didn't find them restrictive. In an odd way, I found them freeing because you are kind of working from a limitation in some ways. Like even some of the larger word lists that I developed that turned into like a sort of a list of 100 or 150 words, you're limited to those words. And so being able to know that you can manipulate them a little bit and that you can add in some small words, it became a lot easier to write the poems once I did that.
Does the limitations give you focus? Like when you have everything at your disposal, you're kind of all over the place, whereas this makes you hone in on something?
That's a good way to put it too. Yeah, for sure. You know exactly like and it became sort of a routine, right? And this was sort of an interesting part of it to me that I when I go back now, I've tried to do it again a few times after not doing it for a year or two, and I find it's a struggle. But when I was in the process and when I had mastered the rules and when it just became a sort of a natural flow, I guess you could call it just being in a flow state. Every time I would sit down, I had my routine and ideas would just pop into my head immediately. I would be able to connect words in weird and interesting ways. And it just became, it just became easy kind of.
Right, because I think you're right in the afterward area that like, you wrote about 10 poems towards the end, like on a 1 week trip, that you kind of gotten into a spot where you were able to, I don't want to say like bang it out, but like just
Yeah.
tap into it maybe.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there were periods of like intense creativity, and when I had the time, because I enjoyed it so much, it was such an interesting process and an interesting challenge. And like I said, once I had set up those rules, it became almost like a game. And so it was just fun to do, and not ever knowing where I was going to end up with. So I'd start off with a title that to me suggested one thing, but then I would get my word list and I'm seeing all kinds of other ideas. And that was a fun experience to go, okay, well, now I'm going to take the poem in a completely different direction than I thought. And even once I'd maybe start with the first few lines, suddenly another idea would pop up, and suddenly there'd be like a shift in the poem that would happen, you know? So yeah, it was definitely like bang it out, I think is an appropriate way to say it. I just sat down and just banged them out. It was great.
Speaking of getting titles, you talk about, borrowing from a variety of
Yeah.
sources. Edmund Spence,
Yeah.
uh, like, is this just reading you're doing for yourself, or were you seeking out sourcing for titles? Like, had you read Edmund Spence before this, or how did you end up on this?
Yeah. I have a really old copy of Norton Anthology of English Literature that I bought when I was in university back in the 90s. And I've hung on to it because it was actually, this version was published in 1975, which is, my birth year. And so it was kind of like a special memento for me to hang on to. And I turned to that book because, just to diverge a little bit, there's an aspect to the poems where I do something called academic absurdity. And I had picked out some phrases from the prologue uh, to that edition of the book. And so I had it open already anyway. And I just started going down memory lane, just looking at some of the things in there and looking at some of the notes that I had made in the book. And that one stood out because it's a pretty weird poem. It's called The Fairy Queen. And especially in the first part of it, there's a pretty crazy, violent scene with a monster with some pretty horrible imagery. And just immediately, a couple of the phrases that the writer was using stuck out to me. And I was like, well, let's see what that does. And the idea of taking a 16th century poem title and putting that into Google and using this AI sort of algorithmically operated system just to see what would come out of it was too intriguing to pass up. So I did it also with Beowulf. And I think those were the only two real sort of like historical famous literary pieces that I used as titles.
Do you see those attempts to kind of take those older poems and put them into this as like a conversation between old poetry and like new form? Like, I mean, because oftentimes, poets live in kind of concert with each other, right? Like contemporary poets are very often, knowledgeable about what other poets are doing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
is this tying into that in some way?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm like a huge poetry lover as far as reading, but I have, I took English language in university and read and enjoy poems from there, and I teach poems sometimes to the kids here. So I do have a love for it, and the thought of, again, sort of that connection that you can make when you're taking this thing that's 400 years old, or in the case of Beowulf, I mean, it's translated into modern English, but the original goes back like 1,000 years. And yeah, I think you phrased it almost perfectly. Having a conversation with the history of poetry is a good way to think of it.
Do you become kind of like a necromancer?
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. Yeah. Yeah, breathing some new life into the into what was already dead. Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
So you do talk about, when you're feeding the words in to the Google, that, as you said, you get these like content words, you don't get connective tissue words, but also that you find when you use like google.ca versus, the like
Right.
Chinese Google, that like, I think it was a Google HK, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
So that you get different words,
Yeah.
and that like they're all like, there's kind of cultural filters at play.
Yeah. Yeah, that was an interesting aspect of it. Um, and often I would find that like the HK list was smaller in some cases. And then the CA list was a lot more likely to have references to sort of, Western pop culture, or even things like, you might be more likely to see things about the outdoors, or things like that. So yeah, there was definitely like, I guess, a cultural bias at play. And because I've been living over here now for 20 years, to me, that seemed perfect because it does represent sort of the two sides of myself, the Canadian side and this side that's lived in China now for 20 years. And so it was kind of a perfect situation to sort of, I think, make the poems a bit more geared towards me. Like I've had a friend here say that when I was telling him about the whole process, he's like, but the poems are still you somehow, even though you're using Google. And I think that's a part of why that might come across, that it's still sort of me somehow because of these two different Googles I'm using.
Well, that does, so obviously you're taking titles from things, you're feeding that into Google, and then Google's giving you results, and then you're then interpreting or reformatting those results. But like usually, like you're not entering this as like a guest in your Google, right? Like you're using your own Google. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like where like,
Yeah.
it's not tabula rasa in some sense.
Right. Yeah, and that's interesting because so if I'm being honest, I don't recall that each and every time I was signed into Google. But what I tell my friend sometimes is, because he's brought this up with me a couple of times, and said that it's going to take things, it knows you, and it's going to take things that you're interested in. But I'm telling you, I have no interest in Korean pop music, like zero. And I was constantly seeing things about different Korean pop stars. And when I would enter in a word, like there was one of them, one of the poem titles, and it's slipping my mind right now, but I had really hoped that it would lead me down a certain path, but it turned out that one or two of the words, when you put them in, were the name of a popular TV show that
Oh,
I'd
this is
never
the
heard
one with
of.
Primeval, right? You were looking
Yeah,
for the
that's
word
right.
Primeval.
Yeah, that's right. Primeval. And so I had never heard of that show, and I know that I've never searched up anything. And so I was getting these word results that were all the names of these actors and the names of the production and plot points and things like that. And so I don't think that it was really taking from me in that way. But yet somehow, and I think this is where the human aspect of it comes in. So even if Google itself, if it's nonsense that Google CA and Google.hk are giving me things that represent my personality, if we strike that possibility off as nonsense, then what I think is happening is it's me and my interpretation. And so it's fascinating to me that I tried to get this going, but I didn't have a lot of success to work with the same set of the same list of words and try to get multiple poets to use the method and to see what kind of different poems we could come up with, because I think you'd get quite different poems that would be interesting to kind of compare and contrast and see how much of the writer's personality is coming into it.
You mentioned striking something off as nonsense, and I guess that brings us
Yeah.
back around to the title and just like
Yeah.
how you define nonsense.
Yeah. Well, how does anybody define nonsense, right? I hate to get all like this about it, but when we come to thinking about our modern lives and trying to make sense out of the world, we come down to this word truth, right? Truth and falsehoods and lies and nonsense. And I mean, it's kind of a trite thing to say at this point, but what is truth and how do we define truth? And so your truth might seem like nonsense to me, and my nonsense might seem like truth to me. And who's to say who's right and who's wrong?
It's interesting you're tying nonsense to truth because to me, when I heard the word, and particularly in regards to the poems, like I think
Mhm.
of it like flights of fancy or fantasy,
Yeah.
right? Like that.
Yeah.
I don't tie it to truth. Like if I
Yeah.
think of the like oppositional force of truth, it's lies, right? Whereas
Sure.
I think like nonsense it lives in the realm of ideas,
Sure.
and ideas are not truths necessarily.
Yeah. Sure. Sure. And I think there's multiple interpretations of nonsense, right? And I do think that there's a range in the book. There's some more traditional nonsense. There's some completely absurd nonsense. There's some playing with this truth and lies types of nonsense. I think we have a variety of nonsense in the book. And I think again, it's part of the fun of poetry in general and literature in general is trying to get at what the author's trying to say. And one of the things I always try to teach my kids here is that there isn't necessarily just one right answer. And if you can back it up with evidence, then your opinion on what the poem means is just as valid as somebody else's. And so I've had some interesting experiences with people here where they've talked to me about one of my poems and they're seeing things that I had never seen before and certainly not intended. But I wasn't going to tell them that they were wrong. You know, I enjoy that process. And so I don't want to say too much about like what I think nonsense is. I think that's up to the reader. I think you've got to read the book, read the poems, and figure out what you think is happening in each of the sections and with each of the poems and with the number of poems and the process that's laid out in the appendix, and puzzle together some bits of truth for yourself.
Right. And based on, my experience talking to writers and to other artists, honestly, sometimes the person closest to the work isn't necessarily to the best person to see it
Yeah,
wholly.
yeah, yeah. I agree
Right.
with
Like
that.
you were talking about your friends saying like they see you
Uh-huh.
and that there's like a personal voice to these things.
Uh-huh.
Maybe you didn't see that
Right.
as the person right at the center of it.
Right.
And the
Right.
person at a step back who knows you but also can see the work is maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I told you, you brought it up before, and about the flow state that I got into and banging out the poems. There were times where I was just banging these things out and just going with what felt right. And I had a sort of a general purpose in my mind, and I did have a purpose to me, like what the poem meant to me and what I thought it was communicating. And sometimes that was just fun with language, and sometimes it was just to create nonsense, but other times there were meanings to the poems. But that doesn't mean that it's the meaning to the poem. And like you said, it doesn't mean that I'm the best person to judge what the meaning is. It's again, I just keep going back to it because I'm a fan of reading and teaching, and it's one of the fun things about being a literature teacher, enjoying that process of kind of coming to your own meaning of what something is about.
And I guess that's one other like concept of nonsense is like play or fun, right? Like people
Yeah,
just
right.
dismiss things as being like frivolous or nonsense if it's not
Mm-hmm.
work, but that
Mm-hmm.
play and fun can be as revealing about something as like scholarly work or work.
Yeah, yeah. And is something that doesn't mean anything, does that make it less valuable? You know, so when you're reading a poem in the book and you're going, what is happening here? This is just nonsense. But isn't that fun sometimes to just let go of meaning and to just enjoy something for the words that it uses and the combination of sounds and the imagery that doesn't make any sense, and just enjoy the process, just enjoy the feeling.
At the end of the book, you lay out the rules that you
Yeah.
ended up creating. How important was it to give people that that roadmap that you sorted out?
I I have sort of like I mean, I don't know where I would find the time for this kind of thing, to be honest, but I had this idea that I would still like to see come to fruition, that at some point there could be like a website, and this could be like a public domain type thing where I've created this system and let's use it. And I'm just very curious about like Google Australia and Google Brazil and Google South Africa. And, are people going to get quite different word lists from the same title? And so if we had some kind of online group or website where we once a month sit down and try to write a few poems, and let's all agree what the title is, and then you use your own personal Google, and let's compare what we wrote and see how different they are or how similar they are. Um, so I really, if this book gets any play and if it gets picked up by people and if people enjoy it, I would love to hear what people are doing with it and what people are writing. And even if they wanted to create some new rules themselves, I mean, that'd be fantastic to me.
Would you ever like, purposely like take the same set of words, put them in like, say 50 different Googles and then write like one series of poems based on just like kind of the differing results? Like, do you think that's something that you would set for yourself, or is that you're hoping just other people will carry this?
At this point now, I think I'd hope that other people would carry it. As much as I love this project, it's good to see it come to fruition now, because I've started this in like sort of September 2022, or it's 2021. Yeah, sorry, I keep getting confused on the dates. I think it's 2021 when I started it. and sort of once the poetry book came out here, and then trying to go through Friesen Press to get it out in Canada and sort of on the internet and everything. Now that I'm working on the promotion, I'm taking that AI art from the book and I'm making those into videos. And that's a whole other aspect that's come out and that's come out from this project. And now I'm taking some of the poems to make longer promotional videos, and I'm putting those poems into AI song generators. And so it's becoming another whole aspect to this project that is super fun, don't get me wrong, but it's just extending it by another year. And so at some point I would just want to like say, okay, I'm done. And it's time to close the door on this, put a bow on it and put it out into the world and then move on to something new. So I think putting the rules out there and having all that information in the appendix of the book is sort of a way to just see if anybody else is interested in trying it. And if anybody out there does try it, I hope that they would email me, because my email address is in the book as well, a special email address.
So speaking of the physical book now, where can people get a copy of it?
The physical book you're going to have to order from friesenpress.com. And I think Amazon, you can order the physical book. It's out on all kinds of websites and stuff, but I'm not sure which ones offer the physical and which ones just offer like a PDF or an ebook. So the two that I know for sure, I think are Friesen Press and Amazon. You can get the physical book.
Sure enough. Now,
Yeah.
with this project in the rear view for you, like, do you have like a new project? Have you set yourself a new goal?
Yeah, I have. I've been working a lot on a lot of different things. So I've written a series of limericks, and I've again set myself that goal of 100, but that's like sort of a long-term one. I just sit down and do a couple like once every couple of months. I'm up to about 70 now. So we'll see what happens with that. I've tried my hand at writing a couple of novels. I've got a novelette finished that I've also done AI art for, and that's kind of the next thing. But then I've got I've done 3 drafts of another longer sort of dystopian novel. And I'd like to see that be my next big thing to sort of wrap up. But like I said, I've just gotten so distracted by what's come out of this whole nonsense project that I just haven't had the time.
Well, the book is Making Sense from Nonsense, not of. Although I
Yeah.
appreciate you making sense of nonsense on this episode. Daniel, thanks very much for taking some time to join me on the program.
Michael, thank you very much. I appreciate it. If people want to check out the AI art aspect of this, you can look me up on like Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. It's DEFINSZ. And if you search that up, you'll find it. Or if you just search Making Sense from Nonsense, you'll be able to find it.